If the North Korean regime is behind this murder, it wouldn't be the first time Kim Jong-un had a family member killed. Stefan Haggard is the director of the Korea Pacific program at the University of California, San Diego. He is joining us now from Pittsburgh. Appreciate you doing so. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Emma.
So as Simon Mosen was reporting, South Korea believes North Korea was behind the murder of Kim Jong-un's half-brother. What do we know about North Korea's capability of carrying out attacks or assassinations outside its borders?
They've actually been involved in this kind of activity in the past. Some of the killings have been quite spectacular. In fact, there was an attempt on the life of former President Park Chung-hee in 1968 that came very close. There was a whole group of North Korean special operation forces that got very close to the Blue House. There was a Rangoon bombing in 1983 that killed many members of Chun Doo-hwan, President Chun Doo-hwan's cabinet. There was the blowing up of a Korean airliner in 1987 on its way back from the Middle East. So there's been a history of spectacular killings, but there have also been targeted assassination attempts of defectors in particular. And one of the pieces of the story, I think, which is about to break, is it's been circulating in Seoul that there was some possibility that Kim Jong-nam was considering defecting, and that one of the reasons he might have been targeted was because of that.
Interesting. But in regards to the investigation, right now we know that 4 suspects are in custody, one of which is a North Korean man, and I think 4 suspects, all North Korean men, are being sought after. On that note, how good are the North Koreans at covering their tracks? I mean, if North Korea was behind this, obviously there were some missteps because now we have at least one North Korean man behind bars.
Well, first of all, let me just say bluntly that I would be surprised if North Korea was not behind this. I can't imagine any other players in this saga who would have an interest in seeing him dead. But this is a really inept attempt compared to others. In other cases, for example, in the destruction of Korea airliner 858 in 1987, we have a very interesting story of the woman spy who was caught, who was one of the perpetrators of that incident. And she had been trained for years and was even expected to try to kill herself. And her colleague did kill himself when apprehended. So the fact that they've outsourced this to a couple of foreign nationals is really very different than the past pattern.
And just more about, what you're hearing, possibly the fact that Kim Jong-nam was attempting to defect, and that may have been a reason as to why North Korea may have targeted him. I mean, he had been living away from North Korea for some time, though, right? I mean, he hadn't been back in North Korea for many years and spent most of his time in Macau and in parts of China.
Right, and that's going to be one of the pieces of the story that's going to be most interesting to watch in my view. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that there was evidence that he was trying to defect at the time he was assassinated, but just that he may have intended to do so. But of course, the big story here is that this is a person who is an actual descendant of Kim Il-sung, and
Right.
So the fact that he would be in the bloodline, so to speak, of the Kim family dynasty, his defection would be really devastating for the regime, very difficult to cover up that a real Kim had defected. And the Chinese have been protecting him, in effect, in Macau and Beijing. And it's not a surprise to me that he wouldn't be assassinated there, but he would be assassinated in a third country. And so the Chinese reaction has been very interesting. They've just announced in the last several days that they're going to cut off North Korean coal shipments. And this is a very big step if they actually carry through on that.